Okay. Greetings from Tokyo. This is Daisuke, and I hope you're well. Just give me 1 second while I set up. And in the meantime, just let me know if the sound is okay. Just give me 1 second, please. Great. John, hello. This is Daisuke. So, how are you doing? Thank you very much for joining today. So, let's just, I'll give it 1 more minute just to get everyone ready. So, Litcrit, hello. Welcome. It's nice to see you. I look forward to talking with you about this film, Good Morning. So, there we go. And Isaac, hello. It's nice to see you. How are you doing? All right. Okay, Andres, hello. Andres, hello. How are you doing? And Jeff, how are you doing? And Ghostburger, how are you doing? I hope you're doing well. Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, as the case may be. And I see a lot of people here. Dave B, Jesse B, SJS Films, wonderful. So it's nice to see all of you. And so what I'd like to do is I'd like to start by saying welcome to this first live stream film club where we will be talking about this film, Good Morning, and this is by Yasujiro Ozu from 1959. So it's very exciting for me, and I'm just a hold on. There we go. It's quite a good film from Ozu, and it's one that I think for some people it's considered maybe a minor film, and yet it's a film that has a lot of, I think, potential for conversation and the like. And so I think it's a good film to start also because I think, if I recall correctly, it's the first film by Yasujiro Ozu that emerges in the DVD Blu-ray Criterion collection. So it's spine number 84. So I don't think any Ozu film appears before then. So I thought it might be an interesting place to start as far as Criterion collection and Yasujiro Ozu. And also it's a color film, and also it's a relatively short film. It's 94 minutes, I think. And so I thought, relatively speaking, it's not one of these 2-hour plus films, and it might be an interesting place to begin with respect to Yasujiro Ozu. And what I'd like to do as a kind of format, if you will, is I will be just making maybe general comments about the film, and I will be trying to ask you questions along the way. Now, it's going to be hard for me to sync up between my questions and then your responses in the live chat, so there might be a bit of a delay, so I apologize for that. But in the meantime, what I'll try to do is when I make a comment, I'll try to talk for as briefly as possible, and then I'll address your live chat for a little bit, and then I'll return to some more comments that I want to make, and then return to your live chat, and then I'll just do that in repetition, just as far as I can go, and let's see where that takes us. In the meantime, please feel free to use the live chat for your own discussions among each other about this film, Good Morning. I just want to let you know that I want to keep the comments devoted to Good Morning. Of course, if you want to ask me some other questions about other films, you're welcome to do so, but I'll probably just be focusing on Good Morning comments only, and maybe Ozu comments in general. I don't want to necessarily talk in detail about other films, and so if I do see those questions, and if I think it's probably not to do with the topic, I'll just with respect, I'll just move along to the next comment or question. Also, it's very difficult for me to keep track with all the questions and comments. So if I miss your comment or question, I really apologize. But you can always ask it or put a comment in a video or another video or on this live stream video after it's uploaded. So again, I apologize for that, but please forgive me. And lastly is, this is going to be everything we're going to be talking about, and in the live chat you can talk about anything you want, spoilers, anything in particular, the ending, what happens with all the characters. So please feel free to talk about the ending and the spoilers of Good Morning, any particular detail. So if you haven't seen Good Morning, please be wary, because I'm going to be talking about this film with a certain degree of detail. So if you haven't seen it, it might be difficult to keep track or keep up with it, or it might spoil some aspects of the film that maybe should remain fresh for you if you haven't seen the film. So with that in mind, my friends, let me just very quickly say good morning, ohayo, and welcome. So let me now just start with just some general comments about Good Morning, and then I'll go to the live chat. So Good Morning is I think it's a very funny film by Ozu. It comes late in his period of filmography, because it's in the late 50s, and he'll be making a few other films after this, but into the 1960s, of course. But this is one of his sort of films from his quote-unquote final period, if you want to call it that. And so we see a lot of certain stylistic devices and certain ways of presentation and style that we might consider sort of Ozu-esque, if you will. According to the credits, this is directed by Ozu, of course, and also the screenplay is by Ozu and also Kogo Noda. So this has, there's a partnership between Ozu and Noda in terms of a creative partnership, and so it's an unofficial partnership, but they've worked together on many occasions, and so we have yet another occasion here, and it feels like a kind of a quote-unquote typical Ozu drama, in the sense that we are getting a family drama, or a drama that is taking place among a set of families here. And we have certain tropes or certain traits of narrative that are taking place, certain ways in which information is being presented. For example, we're not given the entirety of the story immediately, but we're given it in terms of little snippets and little nuggets that are given to us along the way. And then we slowly begin to realize what the connections are between these families and these children and who they are, right? Because at first, I don't know how about you, but when I first see the film, or when I first saw the film, it was very hard for me to keep track of all the characters and all the children. They looked a little bit, they were pretty similar in terms of they had the same uniform, and except for the younger brother, Isamu, they were all fairly the same height, and so it was hard to keep track of who the children were at first. But once the film got going, then it began to become clear. And the same is true with the various characters and the like. So let me just talk about the characters and the general story arc, and let's see what you think about what characters you think are very memorable, or what certain storylines you think are very memorable, and then we'll go from there. So we have the first, what is it? The first, we have four families here, or four families that are living in this little suburban community, if you will, of these houses. And the houses are very similar, or they're basically the same type of house. It's just the decor is different depending on the family. So we have the Hayashi family. So this is the family with the two boys, Minoru and Isamu. And we have the mother and the father there, and the father is played by Chishiryu. So that's the Hayashi family. And then we have the Haraguchi family. So the Haraguchi family, that's with the young son Kozo, or Ko-chan as he's called, and the mother and the father and the grandmother. And this is the story of the mother who is, there's a little bit of a story in the beginning about how the association dues haven't been paid yet, and maybe something to do with this mother, Mrs. Haraguchi, and she just bought a washing machine, and so perhaps she used the money to pay for this washing machine. I don't know. So that's the Haraguchi family. And then we have the third family, which is the Okubo family. Now this is the one with the young boy named Zen-chan. And we have the mother and the father. And the mother is slightly, how should I put it? She's a little bit kind of a rotund, or she also likes gossip. And we have the father, who is works for the gas company, and he's also very free and loose with his flatulence and farting. So that's the third family, the Okubo family. And I think the Okubo family is a little bit is significant because of the father and the mother is very keen on gossip. So that's a very key point of the plot. And then the fourth family, which is the Tomizawa family. Now, the Tomizawa family, at least according to this film, doesn't seem to have any children. And they have a cat, and there's the wife and the husband. And the husband, if you recall, he had to retire from his earlier job because he reached a certain age. And so he is now trying to look for new employment. And at the start of the film, he seems to be unsuccessful in terms of his trying to find new employment. And then the wife, Mrs. Tomizawa, she's the one who, at the beginning of the film, seems to initiate this rumor about Mrs. Haraguchi and the fact that the dues haven't been paid, and perhaps there's something to do with maybe Mrs. Haraguchi used the money to pay to buy a new washing machine. So this is Mrs. Tomizawa, who actually visits the house of Mrs. Okubo at the beginning of the film, and they start this little bit of what turns out to be unfounded rumor. So those are the four families there. And we also have other people inhabiting this world, of course. We have, very significantly, the English tutor who lives in an apartment building, which is probably not so far away. And his name is Fukui, Mr. Fukui. And he seems to be living in the apartment with his sister, who is, I think, a car salesman. And Mr. Fukui, the English tutor, he is an English tutor, but according to what he says in the film, he is currently unemployed. So these are the English tutor is the person that the boys go to for English study. And also, oh yes, I forgot one more thing. In the Hayashi family, we also have the Hayashi family is the one with the mother and the father and the two children, Minoru and Isamu. And there's also one other woman who lives there, which is Setsuko. And Setsuko is Setsuko Arita. And Setsuko is, I believe she is the sister of the wife. And so she is the sister that seems to be living with the Hayashi family. And this is important because Setsuko works in Tokyo, and once in a while she'll bring translation work to the English tutor. And so that's how they have a little bit of a relationship. So Setsuko and the English tutor, Mr. Fukui. And then there's another set of characters who live in the community, which is the sort of bohemian couple. I don't know if they're given a name in the actual film itself, but I know in the credits at the beginning of the film, I think they're called Maruyama. So the Maruyama couple. And I think the suggestion is that they are married. It's not quite clear in the actual film itself, but the credits give them the same last name. So I think we can reasonably assume from that they are probably a married couple. or unless they're unmarried and they just happen to have the same family name or the same last name, I don't know. But I think they're a married couple. And they're rather bohemian in terms of they seem to like to be out late, and they come home and they like singing and dancing, and they have a TV in their house, which is very important because that's where the boys go because they like to watch TV and the current sumo tournament that's going on. And also they are not necessarily well liked in this little close-knit community of these housewives, and they're gossip. So that's a very interesting point. And one thing I want to point out about this couple, which I think is very interesting, and I'd like to get your thoughts about this as well if there's a chance, is the young woman, if you recall, there is a scene close to the beginning of the film where all the young boys, after watching TV at their house, have to leave. And as the two young boys, Isamu and Minoru, are leaving, the bohemian woman, the young woman, goes to them and she says, please say hello to your English tutor. And it's very interesting because in the Criterion Collection Blu-ray release, the Blu-ray, the subtitles in English indicate that she says, please tell the English tutor that his big sister says hello. And Minoru, the elder boy, says, "Oh, so you're his big sister?" And she says, "Yes, I am." And so the implication is that she is the big sister of the English tutor, Mr. Fukui. But I'm not sure if that's actually the case. I don't. My sense is that they're not necessarily related. So in other words, I don't think that young woman is the big sister to the English tutor. It's interesting because there's this Blu-ray of the film. I don't know if you know. This is the Japanese Blu-ray. The restoration is actually this exact same restoration, but this is not the Criterion version. This is the Japanese Blu-ray. The Japanese Blu-ray also has English subtitles. The subtitling is slightly different, though. And at this point, the subtitling in this Japanese Blu-ray actually indicates that she says, she doesn't identify herself as big sister, but she identifies herself as lady friend. So, and I think it's probably better to assume, or it's more reasonable to assume, that this young woman is not the sister of the English tutor, but rather they had some kind of relationship. So maybe they're friends, or maybe they were more than just friends. I'm not sure. But in any event, I think this is also highlighted later in the film by the fact that, remember when we go to the apartment of Mr. Fukui, and we actually get the young woman coming into the room. And she has a little shawl on, and she's actually looking for a new apartment because she wants to move out of this little community because she can't stand the gossip. And when she comes in, they have a kind of nice, very casual rapport, the two of them. So it's sort of suggestive of the fact that they knew each other in the past. But if you listen to the dialogue, or at least try to get a sense of it, they don't necessarily seem like they're talking as though they're brother and sister. They seem more like they're talking like they are friends, or they were friends, and maybe there was an intimate relationship between them long ago. I'm not sure, but they do seem to be on a kind of friendly level that's not familial. And this is further augmented by the fact that after that scene ends, and when the young woman leaves and walks down the corridor, we actually see her walk down as the young woman Setsuko actually emerges and approaches the door. And as they pass, if you recall, they don't necessarily say anything to each other. They just kind of casually nod to each other, but that's it. So that's suggestive of the fact that they don't necessarily know each other. And then as Setsuko goes to the apartment, we see the young woman kind of turn and look and give a kind of I'm not sure what the look might be, but maybe it's a little bit of jealousy or maybe a little bit of interest. I'm not sure. So that suggests to me that maybe the young woman is interested, or at least curious about Setsuko in a way that perhaps might suggest that she might have been the girlfriend of the English tutor. I'm not sure. But also the fact that they pass and they don't know each, or they don't necessarily make any what do they call it? They don't necessarily greet each other, which is a little bit odd to me because they would, in theory, they would probably know each other because they live so close to each other, right? Because they live in the same community or the same locale, but they don't necessarily greet each other. So that might suggest to me that there might be a bit of maybe they don't know each other, but that doesn't make sense to me. So the more reasonable assumption is that perhaps they do know each other, but maybe there is a little bit of tension between them. I'm not sure. Due to what? I'm not sure. But anyway, that's an example of what I like about this film, and is that it's so it has a way of presenting information that is very elliptical, and that makes me try to think about what their relationships are and what the relationships are between this community. There are other examples of this that come and go very quickly. For example, when Setsuko goes to the apartment of the English tutor, and she is talking to the English tutor's sister. There's a talk about a class reunion at this place called Shinzanto, and so then Setsuko then tells Mrs. Hayashi at home about this conversation that she had with the English tutor's sister. So there's a suggestion perhaps that the English tutor's sister and and Mrs. Hayashi at the home maybe have some kind of relationship. I don't know, maybe it has to do with the same school or maybe the same class. I'm not sure, but there seems to be some suggestion of that as well. So that's very, but then that comes and goes very quickly, and it's never explored fully. But that's an example of this kind of presentation of information that the Ozu is employing here. He gives us a little bit to try to suggest some of the pieces that I think we as a viewer can decide to put together or try to put together if we want to. But at the same time, I don't think we have to put them together in order to fully appreciate the film. In other words, I don't think these elements are necessarily vital for a full appreciation and liking of this film. But it's an example, I think, of the elliptical style and nature, which I'd like to talk about in a moment. But in the meantime, let me just now stop here and see what the comments section has, or the live chat's going on. So I hope that this is going well for you. But let me just address the live chat here for a second. Okay. Okay, here we go. So I see a lot of people here. I see Elliot from Manchester, hello, and Darwinia, 55, my dear friend, thank you so much. Evan, hello. Melinda, I hope you're having a good day. I am, thank you. And Adin, oh, Adin, hello, how are you doing, my friend? And Peter, it's great to see you. Genealogy, MAD, M-A-D, not a problem. Oh, Emily, my dear friend, how are you? Nazarene Prod, hello, hello. And oh, Nazarene Prod, I'm sorry, I'll be talking about this in a separate video, but Nazarene Prod, N-A-Z-A-R-I-N-P-R-O-D, has his own YouTube channel, as many of you know already. And he has a great video. He has so many great videos on Argento, Dario Argento works. And also he made a great video about the Robert Bresson film, Au hasard Balthazar. So please check it out. But I will be talking about that in a separate video, and I got his permission to do so. So Nazarene Prod. Okay. Oh, and おはようございます。おはよう。ですね。Ohayo. That's another thing I want to talk about, is the actual greeting, Ohayo, in language. It's a very interesting concept. And so Matthew, nice to see you, Matthew, McNichol, Wolfgratz, fantastic. Ben, How are you, my friend? Comment ça va? Ça va bien? And oh, Michael McGrath, hello. And Jared, hello. It's nice to see you. Martin Diaz Pintos, hello. And yes, don't worry, you can come and go as you please. Don't worry, I'm sorry for the scheduling here. And let's see. Oh yes, so here, Melinda says, I just want to say thank you so much for choosing a film that has a Laserdisc counterpart. I can participate. As you know, I do not collect any other physical media but Laserdisc. And Darwinia55 then says, Laserdisc and first DVD release is not good quality. Yeah, actually, that's a really good point the two of you make. So let me just address that here really quickly. This is the Laserdisc and this is the DVD. So I think I tried to mention it in one of my introductory videos about this. But yeah, I think it's 1.33 to 1 aspect ratio. And the new release is a new digital restoration that was co-organized by Shochiku. And it's really lovely. I don't know. I would say that the earlier presentations are actually quite good. There's nothing bad about them inherently. I think they're quite good. It's just I think for maybe many people the new restoration might seem a little bit, how should I put it, in terms of video quality, the preferable way to go. But I'm very happy with the DVD and the Laserdisc. I love the cover, by the way. I love this weird retro TV, and I'm not even sure why this TV is being used, to be perfectly honest, because as you know, if you've seen the film, at least as far as I can tell, the TV that's the TV, we only see, I think, 2 TV sets in the film, if I recall. The first being the one in the Bohemian couple's house when they're watching the sumo tournament. But I don't think it's this kind of TV set, right? I could be wrong. Please correct me if I'm wrong. The second time we see a TV set is actually in its box when the Hayashi family buys the set from Mr. Tomizawa. But we never actually see it come out of the box. But we see it's a national type of TV set, and we see a little drawing on the box, so it's suggestive of the fact it's probably not this type of TV, but it's more of the square shape or the rectangular shape with the knobs in the bottom. So and National, which is now it's probably better known now as Panasonic. So I don't know why this kind of TV was being employed as a graphic design element on the cover, maybe to evoke some kind of futuristic retro element, I don't know, but it really has nothing to do with the actual plot of Good Morning, except the fact that it's a TV. But it's really great. I like the font and I like the blue motif, and of course Minoru is there in black and white, but his sweater is colorized. The sweater, by the way, is fantastic, is it not? Aren't those clothes great? I love the clothes of the two. They love those sweaters, huh? I mean, we always see Minoru is the elder boy and Isamu is the younger boy. And Isamu has 2 patterns. He's got the sweater with the red stripe, and then he's got the black thing going on with the sort of yellow jumper, I think. So he's got 2 patterns. But Minoru, the elder, he's just got his school uniform, or he's got his sweater with the red stripe across it. So either they wear the same sweater over and over, or they have a lot of the same type of sweater. And so yeah, I love that sweater. I really want one of those sweaters. And isn't it great too, because you notice that they're dressed the same. For most of the time anyway, the 2 boys, but when they're walking around or when they're lying on their back with their feet in the air, you can see that their socks are different. They have different sock patterns. And I think Minoru, the eldest, has a dark pattern with maybe blue or white stripes, and the younger Isamu has the red and yellow stripe pattern, I think. So I love that little difference there. And also, I think it's been commented maybe in one of the essays that the sweater motif is sort of visually linked to the opening credits, because the opening credits has that same kind of color design, which is that faded, I don't know what to call it, maybe faded beige, and then the vibrant red, and also a little bit of white in there. So anyway, that's a little bit about the just some comments that are just from the Laserdisc and DVD comments. So thank you, Melinda, and thank you, Darwinian55, my dear friends. And I'm just going to very gently just scroll through here. Yes. Sean, hello. Yes, Sean, hello. It's nice to see you. And Wolfgrat says, "Love the old lady with the big knife." Yes, 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 yes. So, so what Wolfgrat is talking about, of course, is the grandmother or the elderly mother of Mrs. Haraguchi. So I think the grandmother's character's name is Mitsue Haraguchi. That's according to the credits. And she's the one, remember, who had forgotten about paying the money for the dues. And this is interesting too, right? Because remember when the salesman comes in and tries to push selling some rubber bands or pencils or something. And this is the first salesman with the cap and the coat. And all the housewives seem a little bit put off, and they just want to get him away. So Mrs. Haraguchi tries to ignore or evade, but and she says, "Oh, you know, mother, you take care of her." And so what the mother does is she very calmly goes to the door and sits down and says, "Oh, you know, show me one of those pencils, and here you go." And she just brings out her large kitchen knife and starts to sharpen it, and that immediately sends the signal to the salesman to just go away. And it's really funny, and that was a purposeful thing to do in order to scare off the salesman. And so and so that is an example of the grandmother's or the mother's directness, and she's very straightforward with the way she talks about the way she talks with her daughter, Mrs. Haraguchi, but also in dealing with situations. And I think that's a nice example of, and we also see her praying a lot for some reason. We don't quite know what the significance is. It could be that she is just very into praying, but maybe there is also a more deeper meaning to it, which is never made clear. But I like her character very much because she is very direct, and she is very blunt, and especially talking to her daughter, Mrs. Haraguchi, who is perhaps in many ways, she might be seen as maybe a bit unlikable in the context of this film. So in that sense, it's nice to see the conversations between her and her mother. And I really love that scene with the salesman. And incidentally, that's another thing I forgot to mention, right? Because in fact, the salesman characters are yet another set of characters. And this is very interesting because there's the first salesman with the coat and the hat. And then there's the second salesman that comes in who's a little bit, he seems a little bit more refined. He's a bit more handsome looking, and he is, and the Mrs. Tomizawa and Mrs. Haraguchi are warmer to the second salesman. And the second salesman says, "Oh, you know, I have this alarm that you can use to." You know, it's a very nice alarm and stuff. And so the implication is that they don't, these salesmen don't know each other. But in fact, that's not true at all, right? Because later, not soon after that, we cut to the bar somewhere in Tokyo called Ukiyo. And we actually see the two salesmen, or one of the salesmen comes into the bar, and they sit down and they're talking together at the bar, and they know each other. So it's almost like, I don't know, it's like, maybe they're in cahoots or something. If so, it's a pretty nefarious situation going on there with the salesman. You know, they're trying to dupe or trick these people, perhaps. I'm not sure, but it's, even if it's nefarious, it's presented in a kind of comic style, and we never see the salesman again after they're seen in the bar, I think. So that's an interesting concept in this film. You know, how how certain elements of the plot that might seem to be quite sinister and nasty are presented in a way that is very lighthearted and very almost carefree in a way. So an example being the potential of these salesmen to have maybe less than good-natured motives. The other maybe seemingly nasty or mean-spirited element is, of course, the way in which the housewives gossip, and the gossip can be quite brutal. It starts with the Mrs. Haraguchi being the center of the gossip because she's suspected of perhaps she might have been using the money, the association dues money to, heaven forbid, buy a washing machine. And also the gossip turns on the young couple, right? Because the young couple, they're out at night, and heaven forbid, the young woman she used to work in the cabaret, right? And later, the gossip then turns on Mrs. Hayashi, and the fact that when the children are on their they're on their silent strike, if you will, and they don't say hello or good morning to Mrs. Hayashi in the morning. Mrs. Haraguchi in the morning. Mrs. Haraguchi interprets that to mean that maybe Mrs. Hayashi doesn't like Mrs. Haraguchi, and so Mrs. Haraguchi, who was the first victim of the gossip at the beginning of the film, if you will, now it becomes the aggressor, and she's the one who then instigates the sort of gossip attack. This time, the subject being Mrs. Hayashi, and so it becomes a kind of vicious circle, if you will. It's very nasty, and in fact, perhaps this is part of the reason why the young couple decide to move out of the place, and also Mrs. Hayashi seems to be not liking the situation much at all. So this is a kind of a nasty, or a pretty mean-spirited part of this plot, but it's presented in a way that's very playful, and it's for laughs. The rather corpulent housewife, Mrs. Okubo, she's a little bit, I'm not sure if she's a little bit... maybe she's a little bit gullible, perhaps. But remember, it's interesting about her character, right? She at the beginning, Mrs. Tomizawa comes in, and she says all this stuff to Mrs. Okubo about, the association dues haven't been paid, and the washing machine and all that. And Mrs. Okubo is like, oh yes, yes. And then later, Mrs. Okubo is talking with Mrs. Haraguchi, and Mrs. Haraguchi says, I can't believe Mrs. Hayashi started this rumor about me in the association dues. And Mrs. Okubo says, yes, yes, yes. But, right, the person who started the rumor about the association dues wasn't Mrs. Hayashi, but it was in fact it wasn't Mrs. Hayashi, but it was in fact Mrs. Tomizawa, right? So, but Mrs. Okubo, the heavyset lady, doesn't necessarily correct Mrs. Haraguchi. If Mrs. Okubo had corrected Mrs. Haraguchi at the time, and maybe she said, oh, no, it wasn't Mrs. Hayashi, it was Mrs. Tomizawa who started that rumor, then perhaps the whole second subplot with respect to the rivalry between Mrs. Haraguchi and Mrs. Hayashi wouldn't have occurred. So, in fact, Mrs. Okubo is perhaps just as bad as many of these other housewives who are instigating these rumors. And what I love also about that, though, for one more second there, is the fact that Mrs. Tomizawa at the beginning, who started the rumor about the association dues, so she seems to be the instigator of rumors and lies perhaps. At the end of the film, when everything is being resolved, and remember the two housewives, Okubo and Haraguchi, are like, what's going on? All the boys are happy and they're smiling, and this is after the TV has been bought and everything. What's going on? I can't believe what's going on. Mrs. Hayashi is such a bad lady or something. And then Mrs. Tomizawa comes in, and in fact, Mrs. Tomizawa corrects them and says, no, Mrs. Hayashi is a really nice lady, and then walks away. And so I love how at the beginning, Mrs. Tomizawa was the one who instigated rumor, but that at the end of the film, it's the same character who then stands up for Mrs. Hayashi. and the good thing that the Hayashi family did for the Tomizawas, which was to buy a television set, of course. So I love that how that rumor mill sort of comes full circle with respect to Mrs. Tomizawa. So, but that's another nasty element, I think, that's presented in a slightly playful or comic way. And one more, and then I'll just get to the comments, which is there's this whole thing about pumice stones, if you recall, how the young boys like to grind pumice stones and eat them. And there's this whole thing about, I think during their silent strike, they're not eating as much. And so they're trying to eat that for sustenance. But also earlier on in the film, the idea is that they're eating it because they want to see if it could get them to fart easier. And so they're grinding pumice stones and they're eating it. And I think somewhere, maybe later in the film, Mr. and Mrs. Hayashi are talking. And I think there's this talk about, do mice eat pumice stones? And Mr. Hayashi says, I don't know. And I think the idea is that the amount of pumice stones is probably dwindling. And the assumption is that the parents probably don't know this, but the assumption is that the children are probably taking the pumice stones and eating them. At least that's what I assume. So it's slowly dwindling the amount of whatever pumice stones that they might have. And then, then the parents are saying, what should we do if it's mice? And then I think it's the mother who says, maybe I should put rat poison on the pumice stones. Right? So that's actually quite nasty. So, she's thinking about putting rat poison on pumice stones that she doesn't know the kids are eating. So potentially she could have poisoned her children with rat poison. Fortunately, though, around this time, I think the children are turned off to eating pumice stones because of what the English tutor tells them, is that if you eat too much pumice stones, they'll create stones in your stomach and you'll die. Remember the seal that died in the zoo and that sort of thing. So they become scared and they don't want to eat pumice stones anymore. But they'll try other means in order to generate farting. So, and they're talking about death and the death of seals and stuff. So this other thing about the eating of the pumice stones, I think, is also very comic, of course. But there's a slightly a sinister undertone to it. But it's also played for laughs. So that's just another example of how seemingly sinister or maybe nefarious elements of the plot, I think, are presented in a way that's very pleasant and charming. And again, for laughs, because that's I think the emphasis of this film, obviously so. But anyway, let me just stop there for a moment, and if you have any comments about that, please let me know. But in the meantime, let me just return to the comment section accordingly. So Wolfgratz, thank you very much for that comment about the old lady with the big knife, as you say. Let's see. So. Yes, and Matthew McNichol says, yes, the man selling the pencils always made me laugh, pressuring people to buy things. Yes, the first salesman. Yes. Yeah, so everyone's talking here about the salesman scene. Yes, and Isaac Dunn says, yes, I love the fact that they have a salesman selling equipment to keep salesmen out, and he is in on it with the other salesmen too. Yes, exactly. And we know that because we see them together later in the bar. And Wolfgratz says, more generally, though, this was my second watch of both films, and I'm very pleased to have revisited them. They were a lot richer this time around. That's great to hear. Thank you very much for that comment. And Peter says the gossip sounds like my job. And then let's see. Again, I'm just scanning through the comments, so I apologize if I'm skipping some of your comments. Oh yes, now the conversation is turning to Lady Friend and the sister. And okay, so this is interesting. So again, I made the comment about the Bohemian Woman and how the Criterion Collection Blu-ray is talking about her as, or she refers to herself as Big Sister. With no quotation marks around it. But the Japanese Blu-ray that I have she refers to herself as Lady Friend with quotes around it. And I think also, I don't have the BFI version of this, but I'm not sure what the BFI version says. Maybe there's a comment here. Yeah. Um, yeah, I'm not sure. It could be it could be something like I yeah I'm and oh, Jeff Pixler, hello, greetings from Tokyo, and also to Andre and Paul. It's nice to see you. And I'm sorry, if I've skipped calling you out, I apologize. I'm just trying to go through this as much as possible, as quickly as possible. But if I've skipped your name, I apologize, and just drop me a line again, and I'll try to call you, give a shout out to you. But Paul, Andre, David Pryor, hello, Jeff. Raven Q222, hello. Cinnabrew SI, hello. So Jeff says, I didn't think she was a big sister either, and that she had a romantic interest in him. So him being the English tutor. Yeah, I think that's a distinct possibility, Jeff, and I agree with you. I'm not sure if the relationship was a mutual one or maybe it was unrequited or something. But right, as I said before, that hallway shot when she's leaving the apartment, but then Setsuko's approaching the apartment, you see her at the end of the corridor, and she turns and looks at Setsuko in a way that might be suggestive of perhaps she's jealous. I don't know. But again, all of this is implied, and it's only possible in terms of interpretation, but there's nothing explicit in terms of the information that's presented in the narrative, and I think that's really interesting. I love the way that the present information is being presented to us. It gives us room to think and ponder. All right, so let me. Sorry about this. I've just lost my place here. Let me just return to this in a second, but. Yes, Raven Q222 says, I always assumed they were together. Yes, that's a very good assumption. I agree with you. Let's see. Yes. Oh, so Darwin is 55 is asking about the Japanese that's being used in that when the Bohemian woman is describing herself. The Japanese phrase that she uses is, I believe, onei-chan, onei-chan. So nei-chan is the word that can be it could be it's a word that could be translated into sister, but also it could be used to refer to like a young woman or a woman that is not necessarily related to oneself. So I think it can be interpreted either way. So the fact that she refers to herself as Nei-chan might suggest that, right, as a straight translation, yes, it could be that she is the sister of the tutor. But the word is also used in a way that you don't have to have a familial relationship to use it. So. Okay, so Ghostburger it has a great comment here, and it leads me to another thing I'd like to say. So Ghostburger says, for me, Isamu is the heart of the film. So Isamu is the youngest boy, and his arc stood out to me the most. I think it's when he starts to learn about his individuality, because as the film progresses, he becomes more independent. That is a very interesting observation, Ghostburger, and I never thought about the film in terms of his arc of growth of independence. But the more I think about it, the more I think you're onto something here, right? Because maybe at the beginning of the film, we see him mimicking his older brother Minoru a lot. He's basically saying, parroting a lot of what Minoru says when the children are arguing with the parents at that very central argument, and that starts the whole silent strike. He basically just goes along with what the Minoru says, and he has that great gesture, right? I love that gesture, which is he's using it when he's angry, right? Which is the same gesture that the kids use at the end when they're happy after they're doing all the successful farting. I love that. I should do this more often in my own life, but yeah. So he's mimicking, and he wants to copy everything that his older brother is saying. But I think Ghostburger is onto something here, because remember at the end of the film when the kids are so happy that the father has bought a television, and they're dancing around in their room for joy, and then the father comes into the court and says, gets angry at them, don't be dancing around like that, otherwise I'll return the TV. And the elder seems to be a bit taken by this, but then it's the younger boy Isamu who says, "No, no, no. I can tell. He's not angry. He's smiling." So it's the younger boy Isamu who is defiant at that point. It's not Minoru, but it's the younger boy Isamu. So that seems to suggest that he is not necessarily copying his older brother anymore, but perhaps now he has gained some of his own strength, if you will. And in fact, Isamu is right at that scene, because what I urge you to do is, maybe at the end of this or during this, go back to that scene towards the end when the father is quote unquote angry at the two kids, and after they've bought the TV and they're dancing around in the room. Pause it or look at it very slowly. You can tell that at the medium shot of the father, he's angry, but just before it cuts to the boys, you can see that his mouth is forming a little bit of a smile. Maybe pause it or go through it slow motion. Chichiryu's face, it's really lovely. It has one of those, it's like a, what do you call it, like a Mona Lisa smile. It's very faint, but if you look at it from a certain angle, you can tell it's a little bit of a small inkling of a smile, so to speak. And so I think this is what Isamu is probably sensing when he is very defiant and says, I can tell you're smiling. And then he is very jubilant at the end, and he's got the way in which he does his little red hula hoop there. So that's really great, Ghostburger. That's a great observation that you make about the arc. Really, really lovely. I never thought about that before, but I think you're onto something there. So well done, Ghostburger. Yes. Litcrit says, "Good Morning is striking for its insistent artificiality, the way it highlights the falseness and quote-unquote constructed nature of so many of its spaces, scenes, sounds, words, compositions, etc." Thoughts. Artificiality. That's an interesting concept. I'm not sure. I must admit, I haven't really thought about the film in terms of its visual space and in the context of artificiality necessarily. So I'll leave that to others to try to digest and ponder and discuss. But let me address that phrase artificiality in the context of language, and that's my next point. So maybe I'll go to my next point here. So thank you, Litcrit, for allowing me to do this, which is there's this notion in the film Good Morning about the concept of language, right? And specifically this idea of the argument between the children, Isamu and Minoru, and the Hayashi, the mother and father. And of course, they're very angry because the children are a bit defiant against the mother because they're upset because they won't buy them a TV. And then the father comes in and the mother complains to the father. And that starts the whole fight between the generations, right? The parents and the children. And then the father says, you talk too much. And then the elder, Minoru, says, well, adults talk too much all the time. You say, good morning, hello, how are you? And it doesn't mean anything. And that then initiates the whole silent strike, which forms the narrative for the rest of the film, which is an interesting idea, right? Because I think this idea of language in Ohio, or Good Morning, there's something to be said about what Minoru is saying there, about how language, these sorts of greetings, oh, hello, how are you? It's fine weather today, that sort of thing. Basically are just nothing. In the one sense, they could be seen as being just empty filler, just meaningless talk. And if that's the case, why bother to say anything at all? And I know Minoru is talking about this in the context of his fight with the parents, and so he might not necessarily be trying to make a specific linguistic point, a sociological point. I understand that, but as a theme in this film that's being explored, excuse me, as a theme of this film being explored, I think there's something to be said about how language is treated. So, okay, we can take this to mean that perhaps, yes, perhaps what Minoru is saying might have some credence to it, which is that yes, it is, at least even in the context of this the use of Japanese during this time, the late 1950s. There's this idea of a lot of the greetings tend to be meaningless, or maybe they hide true feelings, and a lot of it is just empty banter, and a lot of it is it really doesn't. If there's no meaning to it, then why bother talking at all? Okay, so that's interesting. But at the same time, however, right, this theme is explored in a very interesting way because, and then just to tie it to artificiality before I move on. So this might be seen as being something of the quote-unquote artificiality that maybe Litcrit is referring to, i.e. the artificiality with which these so-called social greetings are being employed, because they don't necessarily transmit any meaningful information between human beings, but rather they are just empty banter, false things, right? But I would suggest that that's not the case at all, ultimately, right? Because we see this played out in a number of ways in the film. First, recall that when it's the morning after the big fight between the parents and children, and then the young boys leave for school. And as they depart their house, Mrs. Haraguchi from across the way says, good morning. But they don't, the Minoru doesn't respond, and he silently walks away. And Mrs. Haraguchi interprets this to mean that Mrs. Hayashi is still angry at her. And so that then initiates the second part of the whole housewives gossip plot about Mrs. Hayashi is a bad lady or something, and so that's interesting, right? Because it was the fact that there was no greeting between them is suggestive to Mrs. Haraguchi anyway that something is afoot. Right? So it seems therefore to suggest, on the one hand, at least in that context, having a greeting is very important in having sort of peaceful relations between one human being and another. And the fact that there is no such greeting means that that kind of greeting therefore holds a kind of social significance, and that therefore it's not empty banter, but it's in fact something that is very important, and without it there can be no peace, so to speak. So that's an interesting idea. And then also, with respect to the artificiality of language and the formality of Japanese, right? There's this idea that is related in that Japanese tends to be very formal, or it's divided into very formal language and very casual type language. And formal language tends to be reserved for, our relationships where we need to maintain a certain level of, let's say, professionalism or distance. And then casual language is used when we have a more intimate relationship, or where there's a closeness that does not depend on a kind of distance or professionalism. So what's an example? An example would be, for example, maybe just simple talk about, good morning, ohayo gozaimasu, or just simple talk about, isn't the weather nice today? Oh, ii o tenki desu ne, or that sort of thing. So there's a kind of formality or distance that's created in Japanese that doesn't necessarily have a kind of direct intimacy, at least at first glance. And this is very interesting how it's played out, because, and I want to talk about it in the context of the relationship between the English tutor and the young woman Setsuko, the sister Setsuko, right? Because the idea is that probably there's a little bit of a romantic interest between the two of them. And I think it's played out by the end because we see them standing next to each other at the train station platform. And the train station platform, right, they're talking, and he is talking about, oh, it's nice weather today. And then she's just basically copying everything that he says. Oh, yes, it's really nice weather today. And then he says, oh, look at that cloud. It's an interesting shape. And she says, oh, yes, it's look, that cloud has an interesting shape, and that sort of thing. So she basically copies everything that he's saying, and the language is very formal and almost kind of it is quite formal. I should say also that she's basically parroting or copying everything that he says, much in the same way that the young boy Isamu was copying a lot of what his older brother said, Minoru. But my point is that at that point, their language seems at first glance to be very formal and very distant and somewhat maybe without any kind of significance. Just talking about weather. So it could be seen as being just empty banter, right? And even in the Japanese, it's very formal and polite language. But I would suggest, and I think a lot of people might agree, which is that it's that moment, right, that the two of them seem, or at least the narrative seems to impose upon that couple a kind of the possibility of romance in the future, or maybe they are connected and they are at once, the implication I think is a fair one to make, that they are going to be a couple. And I think that's the last time we see the two of them. And so it's interesting that it's that formal, polite language that is at the focal point of this moment when they seem to be at their most intimate, if you know what I mean. So I love how there's an interesting counterpoint, if you will, between the language that they're saying and the implications that the narrative is imposing vis-a-vis the viewer and the way we are interacting with these two characters. I think that's a really interesting connection. In other words, they are, I think, the implication is that they are intimate, or they are going to be intimate, but it's at this moment when we realize this, that they're using the most formal or polite language that they are employing in Japanese. So that can indicate either the meaninglessness of the actual language that they're using at the time, or it could imply the opposite. In other words, it could imply that the actual language that they're using, despite it being formal and polite, is in fact filled with meaning in a way that is bringing them close together, right? It's allowing a kind of connection between the two of them, because everything that he says is basically something that she's repeating. So, and she doesn't seem to be repeating it in a way that is paining her, or she's forcing herself to say it. No, on the contrary, she seems to be saying it in a way that she wants to be with him, or she wants to make a connection with him, and so therefore she's showing that by basically saying the same things or agreeing with him in the same way. And I find that to be very, very pleasant and delightful. And I think that's an indication of the way in which language is used. It's not necessarily the fact of you have formal, polite language and then casual language. No, even the formal, polite stuff, it might be seen as empty banter, but in fact it has a certain significance and meaning and a way of connecting characters that is very significant. And I think the characters of the English tutor and the sister, I think those two, that situation is an example of this. So Litcrit, thank you so much for this comment. I think it's a very, very good one. Oh, and before I go to the next comment, I should say about the greeting, Ohayo. This is also very important too. I'm not sure if it comes across in the English, but in Japanese, when we say Ohayo, or good morning, there are basically two ways we can say this. Ohayo and Ohayo gozaimasu. The first way, Ohayo, is a little bit not so formal, polite. It's not a faux pas to say Ohayo to someone that demands respect, don't get me wrong. But Ohayo gozaimasu is the more formal, polite way to say good morning. Ohayo gozaimasu. It's not like, it's not overly cold or anything like that. You can say it, to your family, Ohayo gozaimasu, and that's perfectly fine. But for instance, maybe when I'm talking to my boss or something, I won't say to him, Ohayo. but I will say to him "Ohayo gozaimasu." Maybe when I'm talking to maybe a friend who's older than me, maybe if I see that friend in the morning, I won't say "Ohayo," but I'll say "Ohayo gozaimasu." But when I see my kids in the morning, I'll say "Ohayo." Or maybe when I see when I'm talking with a dear friend, or when I say hello or good morning to my wife, I'll say "Ohayo." I can also say "Ohayo gozaimasu," but that's fine. Maybe if I'm talking to my in-laws, I'll say "Ohayo gozaimasu." In other words, "Ohayo gozaimasu" is the more formal, polite way, and "Ohayo" is quote unquote the casual way. So it's really interesting when characters say "Ohayo" and when characters say "Ohayo gozaimasu" in this film, and that's related to this whole idea of formality and politeness versus casualness and intimacy. It's interesting, right? Because whenever the sister and the English tutor, they greet each other, they don't say "Ohayo gozaimasu," they say "Ohayo." And then they go into Japanese conversation that is filled with, I think, formal or polite language, desu ne or something. But they greet each other with "Ohayo." And that suggests to me a kind of friendliness or casualness. And I think that is really important. And I think that goes against the hypothesis of Minoru. This is not empty banter. I think also the tutor later describes these greetings as being like social lubricants. But I think actually it's more significant than that, because the fact that one chooses to say "Ohayo" versus "Ohayo gozaimasu," I think is a very significant choice. Very significant choice. It's suggestive of the fact that perhaps there is the yearning or the want to try to have a casual or more intimate relationship with the other. So therefore, I think there's a lot that can be conveyed just by the simple greeting "Ohayo" or "Ohayo gozaimasu." And again, I return you to the whole scene where Minoru doesn't even say "Ohayo" to Mrs. Haraguchi, and that starts that whole second part of the narrative involving the housewives and the gossip. So in fact, "Ohayo" and "Ohayo gozaimasu" and that greeting is so significant, and I think that is it's so fitting, therefore, that the film is actually called "Ohayo." It's not called "Ohayo gozaimasu," but it's called "Ohayo" in Japanese, good morning. Anyway, Litcrit, thank you very much for the great comment. And if anyone has any more thoughts about that or comments, please let me know. Okay, just continuing on with the comments here. So I'm going to be skipping over a few, just in the interest of time. So I apologize, but I'll try to catch. Okay, so I see Paula. Hello, Paula. It's nice to see you. So greetings from Tokyo, my friend. And let's see, and Harry Isola from Finland. It's nice to see you again. So greetings. It's nice to see you. The Cinematheque. It's nice to see you as well. Great to see you. Oh, Tim Holm. Hello. Okay, so Tim Holm, you have a comment here, which brings me to my next point. Tim Holm says, "Who would have thought flatulence would be an important point in an Ozu film?" Flatulence, farting. This is very, very interesting. Okay. So I think it's one of the things that people comment on first when they're talking about this film. Farting. Okay. So I admit that I think the concept of farting is a very interesting one, because it's something that I think every human being knows what farting is and what the experience of farting is, right? Or flatulence. And so, it's something that is considered maybe to be a bit lowbrow, or something that is not spoken of. It's sort of like a potty humor or toilet humor. And so farting. And so it's usually never an element in these films, right? But it's very prominent in this film. Okay, so what's the deal with the farting? Well, I think I mentioned it in the video, but in the one of the supplements here, I think by David Cairns, on the Criterion Blu-ray, there's a great visual essay in which David Cairns talks about the notion of flatulence and the lowbrow humor that's being employed by Ozu. But in fact, he's suggesting that there is a through line in Ozu's filmography with this idea that Ozu is also a comic director, and also that we see this kind of lowbrow humor being employed in earlier films. Not necessarily farting per se, but the similar kind of, or the same genre perhaps. And so I really would recommend that if you can watch that supplement. And I think there's a lot to be said about it. And also he makes the point also that I agree with totally. And I think maybe David Wardwell makes the same point. But right, the farting, the way it's employed in this film, it's very, I think all the noises are by musical instruments. It's got that little, like the high horn sound, like a sound, or the little the tuba sound, like the when you've got the father, Mr. Okubo, who works at the gas company, and they work at the gas and he works at the gas company. They're eating sweet potatoes and burdock and pumice stones in order to try to get them to be gaseous. And whenever the husband, Mr. Okubo, makes a fart, the housewife says, "Did you say something?" And so, no. So if you can imagine their relationship, right, the couple's relationship, she must be doing that constantly every day. I mean, I don't know what the deal is with that relationship, but it's very funny. And in fact, there's one scene where, there's one point where he farts, and then she says, "Did you say something?" He said, "No." And he farts again, and then she says, "Did you say something?" And then he actually says, "Yes." He says, "Actually, I'm going to go to, such and such a place, and do you want me to get some sweets?" And so he actually acknowledges that, or he seems, he says that he does say something, even though he didn't say anything, because he was actually farting. But I think that was a really funny moment. But yeah, so what am I saying? So the farting, right? It's very musical, and it's presented in a way that's very playful, and it's not so kind of disgusting, right? And it's all done in like tongue in cheek and for good laughs, and the boys are so proud of themselves, right? They go like this, right, whenever they succeed in their farting after they press their foreheads. And that's another thing too. Maybe it's the same thing like in English where you say pull my finger. Is it the same kind of thing? Because I don't, I'm not sure about this whole thing about pushing the forehead to cause a fart. But it's within the rules of the film. I think it works very well. But yeah, it is lowbrow, but I don't think what I love about this is that Ozu doesn't shy away from this, and he just presents it in a way like, I mean, when someone farts, I mean, I don't know about you, but maybe I won't necessarily laugh out loud, but maybe inside I'll be laughing because it's just something that is just inherently funny, and so. And so the fact that it's part of it's the forefront of this film, I think, is what makes this film quite remarkable and itself very charming. And the fact that it's presented in a way that is, again, not vulgar, not necessarily lowbrow in and of itself, because it's almost musical. There's a scene on the hill where the Mr. Okubo is doing the morning exercises with Zen-chan, his son, and Kozo, the son of Mr. and Mrs. Haraguchi, and they're just and every time he does a little dip, he gives out a little thing there, and they're so proud, and the boys are just talking, oh, he's the best, and in fact it's Mr. Okubo who's considered the best farter, and he's considered like a hero almost among the boys. So it's a really amazing thing, and also that leads me to the point about. Not just flatulence and farting, but also there's the running joke. There's the running joke about Kozo, Ko-chan, the boy, and how he tends to be a little bit. He tends to have a little bit of trouble, right? Because maybe he'll have the occasional accident. and he'll have to go home and change his underwear, his drawers, and that becomes another running joke because they don't have enough underwear, and so he says, "Kashite kureo, kashite kureo." So he says, "Give me another pair of underwear, mom." And so, and you can see he's very down and he's sad and he's walking in a way that suggests the fact that he's had a little bit of an accident. And so this is another running gag in the film, and again, it's considered maybe lowbrow. I mean, we don't see anything explicitly suggested, or not. We don't see anything explicitly said in the film, except the discussion between the mother and the son, and just the idea of underpants and what are you eating lately and all that stuff. But that's another lowbrow aspect of the film, and people might think, well, why is this joke in the film? And in fact, it's a joke that ends the film, right? Because we see on the clothesline, triumphant as the film closes, and we've got that wonderful musical score. The three underpants that are being hung out to dry. And notice the color of the clothes pegs, by the way. I think you've got different colors there, and the different designs of the underpants, the blue and the white and the one with the stripe, I think. But what am I saying? So yeah, so why is this part of the humor and the landscape of an Ozu film? A young boy who has accidents, right? That's a good point. And to be perfectly frank, I don't know, except the fact that it's played for laughs, obviously, at Kozo's expense. But he's a very likable boy, and they all are. But he's a very likable boy, and so it's funny to see these kinds of situations unfurl. But also, I would leave you with this, and maybe some of you out there who are experts in Japanese literature might have a better sense of this than I. I'm not the biggest expert in Japanese literature, but there are examples, very prominent examples, excuse me. There are prominent examples in Japanese literature where you've got these very flowery, beautifully intricate scenes or characters, but then suddenly maybe some characters are going to be talking about bodily functions and about going to the toilet or something like that, and it's almost like a commonplace thing interspersed in these scenarios and situations presented in Japanese literature. Just to give one example, I don't want to say too much about it because I don't want to spoil it, but just the Makioka sisters, Tanizaki's the Makioka sisters comes to mind immediately, and so my point is that, again, I haven't fleshed it out fully, but I do think that the case can be made that this kind of sort of a potty talk, if you will, or talk about bodily functions, is something that is not foreign to, let's say, the landscape of Japanese literature. And in that sense, we can therefore maybe forgive Ozu, but I don't think forgive is the right word. I think it's not unnatural to see this sort of thing played out in Ozu's films. And I would say also that if we are to make a connection, some kind of connection, Japanese cinema and Japanese literature or something like that. I mean, however tenuous it might be in the micro, but let's take it in the macro, broad context, right? I think something can be said about the fact that, yes, we're talking about bodily functions here, right? There's nothing wrong with that necessarily. So, and it does have its sort of antecedent in Japanese literature, I think. So, I don't know how strong that suggestion I've just made is. Perhaps it's not strong at all, but just food for thought, I suppose, and something to consider. So, anyway. Thank you very much, Tim, for the great comment. And yes. Oh, and also, I just love, just speaking of the humor and the whole thing about the farting and the flatulence, I love the bit where, what is it, at the train station at the end, where the English tutor and the sister Setsuko are meeting. Just before we see them talking, we see a shot of the train station in the distance, and in this part of the frame, we see a sign. It says "sweet potatoes." I love that. I love that. That's such a great moment. Let's see. Okay, so just returning to the chat here. So Solitary Ronin Films, hello. Cabello, nice to see you. You're watching football. I hope you had a good time, but it's nice to see you. And again, just going through the commentary again. I'm scrolling through. I'm so sorry, but just in the interest of time. And there's more discussion here about the use of sister. Cabello asks Daisuke, as a young man growing up, was flatulence a big part of your life? That's a great comment. Um, uh, I don't know if it's a big part of my life, but yeah, I mean, I was, well, I don't know, how should I put it? I was never in a situation with my friends growing up where we were trying to better each other, who was the better farter or something. But yeah, I love that question. Awesome question, Cabello. I love it. I love it. Fantastic. Oh, All Things Film, my friend. Hello, how are you? It's nice to see you. And Emily, I see, is talking about the sweater and the socks. Yes, the striped socks. Those are really key. I love the booklet, I think, for the Blu-ray. If you, this is, I take the booklet out and, gosh, is it here? Yes, yes. If you see this picture of the, it's a drawing, I know, but it's a pretty accurate depiction of the boys. But if you look at the booklet here, I'm sorry for the bad picture quality, but the socks actually are a different design and pattern, the color pattern. So take a look at that. The young boys, the younger boy, Isamu's sock pattern or sock color is I think red or maroon, whereas the elder boy's sock pattern is black and white stripes. So, and let's see. Darwinian55 asks, can you explain the historical significance of the community dues? Are they mandatory like HOA fees? I have no idea about the historical significance, except that perhaps it is we can tell that the houses, I mean, this is my own speculation, but the houses are all the same build, the same style, and it seems to be within the same community or the same plot of land. So I can only assume that perhaps it's the same plot of land that these houses are all occupying. So perhaps it has something to do with that. I'm not sure, but that's my best guess. Jeff Pixler says, I found it interesting that Ozu showed each lady handling the salesman in a different way. That is a very good point, very good point. And actually that leads me to my other, it's a related point, but when you watch the film again, notice, try to notice how each of when they're talking to each other, and in particular the housewives, notice when they're talking to each other, how they are facing each other. Sometimes they're sitting down. For instance, the first time Mrs. Okubo and Mrs. Tomizawa are talking at the beginning, Mrs. Okubo is kneeling down at the doorway, and Mrs. Tomizawa is sitting down, kind of turned sideways and talking like that. And then when Mrs. Haraguchi is talking and she has a kind of argument with Mrs. Hayashi, they're both sitting down facing each other, kneeling. Almost it's like a face-off. Then when Mrs. Hayashi goes to Mrs. Okubo and she's kind of talking about, what's the deal with the dues, and I'm worried about the whole deal with the gossip. Mrs. Okubo is kneeling down at the doorway, but Mrs. Hayashi is standing up. So there is a little bit of a distance, right? So in other words, when one character is kneeling down and the other person is standing up, that seems to suggest to me that maybe there's a little bit of distance between the characters. When a character is sitting down and turned like this, that seems to suggest a real closeness or intimacy. And then when the characters are kneeling together, face to face, that might even suggest a kind of almost an antagonism, perhaps. I'm not sure. That's not true all the time, but it's worth taking a look at the way that the posture is changing and how that changes the dynamic between the characters. It's really fascinating. For instance, let me just say that the Haraguchi-Hayashi dynamic changes, right? At the beginning, they are kneeling against each other. But then when Mrs. Haraguchi goes back to her house and she realizes that the money was just forgotten by the grandmother, she comes back and she's all friendly and she's just standing at the doorway just trying to be so friendly. Oh, sorry about what happened before. So the posture is completely different. So that's an interesting point, but that is uh, uh, that's a kind of related point to Jeff's comment, a great comment about how each housewife handles the salesman in a different way. Well done, Jeff. Kevin Browning, hello. I noticed that the musical motifs were a lot like Jacques Tati's. It's a good point. Lindsay, it's nice to see you, Lindsay, my dear friend. Let's see. So Lindsay's asking, I was wondering if you could talk more about the interesting Japanese dialogue in this film, as you mentioned in your intro video, and about the significance of Ohio as the title. Yes. So I just spoke about that. Yes. Wow, you and I are thinking about the same thing, Lindsay. So yes, it must be some kind of telepathic link between you and I, between you and me. So yes, I spoke about my thoughts about the significance of the title Ohio, and how I think it has something to do with the artificiality of language, but also, on the contrary, I think it has to do with the intimacy with which language can show the intimacy between two human beings. So thank you, Lindsay, for the great question. I love it. Great. I hope you're doing well, by the way. Let's see. Wow, what a conversation is fantastic, guys. You guys are doing so well. Wow. Wow. Oh, yes, and Isaac's talking about the houses in this community. When you watch the film again, can you try to get the geographic space here? Right? It's amazing. This is amazing. The way in which, every house is basically the same build, so it's so confusing. And the doors are open, so it's like, people are looking into the other houses, but in fact there's a street or there's a road between them. So it's like one big house, and it's sort of labyrinthine. So, right? Gosh, I think. Do I have it right? So Haraguchi has the house with the white sign. It's the white sign that says Haraguchi Mitsue, which is the name of the grandmother. And in fact, it's the Japanese, which I think can be it's like midwife. So there's the white sign. So wherever you see the white sign, that's the Haraguchi house. And then, oh gosh, I drew it down. I actually drew a little thing on a piece of paper, but gosh, when you watch the film next time, try to figure out the geographic space. It's such a fun exercise. That's another thing about Ozu and his style, right? The way in which he's displaying the geography of the space, and how he won't have any regard for the sort of the axis, if you will, of the way in which to shoot a scene that we understand it to be in the traditional Hollywood sense of the word. We've got the hill at the background, but then we sometimes see shots from the opposite direction. It's really great, and the hill is very interesting too, right? The hill, right, when characters go from let's see, from your perspective, it'll be from right to left. That means that it's the afternoon. When the characters are going from left to right, that is indicative of the morning, because that's the way in which people walk to work or school. The exception, of course, being the couple. The couple walk from right to left in the morning, because that suggests the fact that they've had a long night. So and that's really interesting too. And I love also the fact that the film starts with the characters walking from right to left. The film is called Good Morning, but the film starts with the characters walking home in the afternoon. And the film ends with them walking to school. Good morning. So I love that little switch there. I love the fact that the film is called Good Morning, but in fact starts in the afternoon. I don't know. It's an interesting thing. Anyway, let's see. So Isaac, thank you so much for that. Yes, and there's more talk about the salesmen. Yes, the salesmen are interesting characters, and they're only on screen for a moment, and then they disappear from the narrative forever. DJ. Hello, greetings from Tokyo. Yes. Gosh, it's nice to see you. Oh gosh, this conversation is great. Great. Let's see. Is there... Oh, Matthew's asking, are there audio issues? If there are any audio issues with this live stream, please let me know. But I don't seem, it seems from other people that there are no audio issues here, but if there are any audio issues on my end, I apologize. I do have a mic connected to the phone, but there might be some audio issues. If that's the case, I really apologize. I'll try to fix it next time. Yes, there's this talk about great. Oh, Solitary Ronin. Solitary Ronin is here. So before I forget, I want to say Solitary Ronin Films. Solitary Ronin. Please, I will make a video about this, but please check out his channel, his YouTube channel, Solitary Ronin. He is doing a lot of great work, but among his great work, he is doing discussion on the Apu trilogy, Satyajit Ray Apu trilogy, Solitary Ronin. Check out his channel. Please subscribe. I will be talking about his work in a separate video soon, but I love it. I love it. And also, please let me take a moment now for anyone who's watching, who is new, and you haven't commented yet or you haven't subscribed to my channel. Welcome. And I'm so glad to see you, and I hope you are doing very well. If you want to subscribe to this channel, I would be very happy to see you and to say hello to you, and it would be my pleasure just to talk with you. So please consider subscribing. You don't have to if you don't want to. This is not anything that you have to do. You can still watch the videos and not subscribe, but it would really mean a lot to me if you were to subscribe, because that will mean that a certain, well, it has a certain significance in terms of YouTube. So if you are interested, I would really, really appreciate if you could subscribe. That would really mean a lot to me. But again, there's no pressure. And the other thing that would really mean a lot to me is if you would leave a comment and just let me know what kinds of films you're interested in, any questions or comments you have on a particular film that might be the subject of discussion. Great, and I do my best to comment to every comment. It takes me a little bit of time, so please forgive me if I haven't responded to a comment yet. But please, I'd love to hear what you have to say about a film, and it would be nice to have a conversation with you, and you know, maybe yeah, just to. It's always nice to make new friends, right? So. Yes, so if you're interested, I just humbly ask that you consider subscribing to this channel, and also I would humbly ask that you consider leaving a comment, and so we can have a nice conversation about cinema. So anyway, that's for anyone who's new out there. So welcome, and I hope you're doing well. Okay, so gosh, I'm just going through this. Yes, yes, oh gosh. Oh yes, Kevin Browning says, this is a great comment. So Kevin Browning says, this is my second Ozu film. My first was Tokyo Story. I was shocked at the fart jokes, yet I really loved the satirical nature against consumerism. It was a brilliant take on comedy and modern society. This is great. Thank you so much, Kevin, for bringing this up. So this is something else I wanted to talk about, which is consumerism. This is the late 1950s. And we've got this idea of TV, and we've got this idea of, right, because TV is now emerging, and it's still an expensive item, but it's emerging. And as you know, the late 1950s will be a moment where TV will suddenly cause a certain shift in the way households consume information. And consume entertainment. Before that, it was always going out to the cinema, but now TV will be emerging, and that's how people will listen to things, or not cinema, but also cinema and the radio and the like. But excuse me, TV is emerging, washing machines, and all this stuff, right? Conspicuous consumption, perhaps, because, right, when one of the households, the Haraguchis, buys a washing machine, it becomes a big deal. When the Bohemian couple has a TV, it becomes a big deal. So, you know, this is very interesting. Now, I don't know if it's necessarily a thing against consumerism per se, right? Granted, there is the discussion in the bar, the Ukiyo bar, around the middle of the film, where we have Mr. Hayashi and then Mr. Haraguchi talking. And then there's another gentleman at the bar who I don't quite know who he is, but they're talking about TV. And Mr. Haraguchi says, I want to have it. They're drunk and they're saying, I want to have a TV, but I can't afford it. But then Mr. Hayashi says, it's going to cause 100 million idiots or something like that. And, in other words, TV is going to dumb down the younger generation. At least that's what he's suggesting. I'm not sure if he really believes that or not because he's drunk, but perhaps he does. And that might be the main reason why he is so hesitant to get a TV for his children and his family. So that might be something against consumerism, perhaps it might signify the dumbing down of society vis-a-vis or in as exemplified by the TV, at least as described by Mr. Hayashi at this point in the film. But I would then counter that, or respectfully counter that, with the scene involving, I would counter that in two ways. One, at the end of the film, of course, Mr. Hayashi actually buys a TV. And also, remember who he buys it from. He buys it from Mr. Tomizawa. So Mr. Tomizawa was the gentleman, remember, who basically was forced to retire because of his age. And then he then eventually found a job working for, I think, an electric company or an appliance company, I think is the implication, although I'm not quite sure. But he does sell electrical appliances like washing machines and the like. And one of the things he sells are TVs. So remember, the way it's expressed is as a way of celebrating or congratulating Mr. Tomizawa on his finding a new job. Basically, Mr. Hayashi buys a TV from him. And so it's this act that is the center point of consumerism, namely the exchange of goods for money. In this case, the exchange money and TV, right? Exchange hands. That is the completion of the transaction. That is at the core of consumerism in the society, capitalist consumerism. So, but that gesture is not in any way a negative gesture. It is a very positive gesture because it is a celebration of Mr. Tomizawa finding a new job. It is also, perhaps, it's assumed that it's this gesture that causes Mrs. Tomizawa to really like the Hayashi family, and in particular Mrs. Hayashi. And so therefore, at the end of the film, it's Mrs. Tomizawa who comes to Mrs. Hayashi's defense in the whole scene involving the housewives and their gossip, right? And then the purchase of the TV brings peace back to the Hayashi household, and the boys start talking again. And so I find that moment to be a very peaceful one. It helps to resolve many of the issues of the film, and thus it is like it is like almost like an emollient, if you will, and it becomes, I think, a very positive sign. So in that sense, I would say that consumerism is dealt with not necessarily in a negative way, but also in a positive way. And we see the introduction of TV not necessarily as a kind of death knell to the older generation of society, but rather it's just something that is a cause for celebration, perhaps. But Kevin, I think your comment is absolutely fantastic, and you center in on such a key concept here. And remember, we're seeing all these things play out. I mean, we don't see cars necessarily. We see trains, but we don't see cars. But we see TVs, we see washing machines, we see people, the housewives in kimono dress, but we also see people dressed in Western dress. So all these elements are coming in. Very interesting to see this development. We see, the suburban area is not populated with a lot of houses or a lot of buildings, but I would say that modern day Tokyo now is it's very rare, I would say, to see this kind of area in modern day Tokyo, unless you go way, way out into the outskirts. So, so the idea of urbanization is not quite as prevalent here. So there's still a kind of residential, suburban quality to this film that I think is no longer existent in today's Tokyo society. But all of these are, I think, very interesting elements that signify or show, at least on a very a basic level, the kinds of things that we can see as sort of signifiers or modifiers in this contemporary time, the late 1950s. So this most perhaps the most significant, which at least in the context of the narrative, being of course the television. So anyway, thank you, Kevin, for the great comment as always. Okay, so just in the interest of time, I'm just going to speed it up because it's almost 2 hours, so I'll just be maybe for another 10 minutes. And if I'm going to skip over your comment, I really apologize. But yes, DJ, hello again. And I think, am I at the end? Yes, I am at the end here of the conversation. So I am up to speed. So that's great. So. If I've skipped over your comment, I really apologize, but, oh gosh, wait, let's see. Oh, okay, show, there we go. Okay, so I just, SJS Films, sorry about that. So sometimes a comment will require that I need to okay it, so I've just pushed that. I think there's a swear word, and I don't mind swearing at all, so don't worry about that. I think some people, oh gosh, have some people left? Oh my goodness. Hold on. Oh my goodness. Wait. Oh, wait. I've skipped a lot. I'm sorry. I've skipped around a lot. I apologize. Okay, I've jumped around too much. I really apologize. So, I thought I was at the end, but actually I pushed the button. So I'm just going to scroll down very quickly here just to see if I haven't missed anyone. I really apologize for this. Oh gosh, this is so great. You guys are having such a great conversation. Oh, okay. So I have missed some people. So if I have, I apologize. So I'm going to try to make up for this as best as I can. So DJ, I've said hello, and oh, Lufrin, yes, hello. It's nice to see you, my friend. Barmerside 88, hello. And oh, you have the Australian version. So I don't know anything about the Australian version. So, and Martin, so I've said hello to you already, but hello again. I'm Cold Hold Me from Oklahoma. Hello. Well, it's nice to meet you. I don't know if we've spoken before, but if this is the first time, hello. Greetings from Tokyo. David Vandal, hello, my friend. How are you doing? And let's see. Sorry about this. I'm just going very quickly here. I very apologize. Really apologize. The conversation is great. You guys are great. Lufrin's asking, is the farting symbolic to something in Japanese culture? I don't think it's necessarily symbolic. It's not like, you know, there's nothing. I mean, it's not like a sign of pride or anything. It's just part of the film, I think. But let's see here. Sorry about this. Asian movie enthusiast, my friend, yes, awesome. Asian movie enthusiast. Check out his channel if you haven't already. He's got a like Takashi Miike Films Volume 11. Oh gosh, I love that channel so much. Oh, Asian movie enthusiast. It's like he knows everything about Asian cinema. Absolutely amazing. Bailey Walsh, hello, my friend. It's nice to see you. And hold on, there we go. And let's see. Oh yes, Bailey asked. I hope you don't mind me mentioning this, Bailey. But Bailey asked in an earlier video, I think, you know, what are some Ozu films to watch for the beginner? Because she was asking, I think, should I watch other films in preparation for Good Morning? And I think I responded to her that I don't think it's necessary to watch a lot of films prior to Good Morning. Of course, you can always try to watch the films in chronological order to the best of your ability, but I don't think it's necessary. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, for anyone who has never seen an Ozu film before Good Morning, but I think Good Morning is actually a good place to start for an Ozu film. I mean, there's nothing necessarily. I mean, it might put some people off with the whole flatulence and stuff, but I don't think it's all that bad. And it's very pleasant, and there are a lot of comic moments, and it just goes by so quickly. It's great. So I think it's a great first-time watch, first Ozu film watch for anyone who's new to Ozu. But if you disagree or if you have any comments about that, please let us know. Oh, before I forget, just about its comedy, there are some great comic moments here that I just wanted to mention before I move on. One of the funniest scenes is when the boys are in their silent strike, and remember, at school they've been asked to bring their lunch money in to school the next day, and this puts the boys in a little bit of a pickle, right? Because they have to ask their parents for the money, but they can't because they're on the silent strike. So they go into the house, the main room at night, and they're trying to. First, it's the little boy, and he's trying to get them to pay the money, but he can't transmit what he's trying to say. And so then the elder comes in, Minoru, and it's kind of he's trying to go like this, and he's like this, and it's this bit of charades almost. And the sister Setsuko is like sitting there just saying, what are you talking about? So he's trying to guess what he's saying. So she's saying like, there's a fire, and there's a fireman, and the fireman put out the fire, and he drank some tea, and you gave him some money or something. He just totally gets it wrong, that's one of the funniest moments. He's trying to get her to pay the lunch money so that he can bring the lunch money to school tomorrow, but then she interprets what he's trying to say as being the fireman put out a fire, you drank some tea, and so you gave him money. That's great. And other details too. Notice at the beginning, the Bohemian couple. Maybe you've mentioned this in the comments already, but notice the movie posters that they have. I think they have the ones I remember seeing are the Defiant ones and Les Amants, which is the Lovers. I think it's the Louis Malle film, The Lovers. So they have the Lovers poster on the wall there. So they're fans of cinema, and I dare say perhaps they would be fans of the Criterion Collection, perhaps, right? Because of the Lovers or Louis Malle. But anyway, sorry, moving right along. Oh, and just in the interest of time, let me just say the last thing I wanted to mention was Ozu's style in this film. A lot of you have talked already about the use of color, and I think it's great. The sweater. There are moments of little instances of like red cups and bowls. There's a green kettle that is very significant because it's the tea that the little boys basically pinch from the kitchen, and as they run away, and they're eating rice and tea by the river, which is later apprehended or collected by the police. And the color of the dress and the costumes, but the fashion, etc. So all this plays a part in the style, right? But there's also, I think, cinematic, stylistic points that Ozu makes, which is very interesting. For instance, and these are just some examples, notice how editing is employed here. I'm sorry, before I get to that, first notice the way the camera is used. And this is not enough time to talk about this, but notice the way that the eye line is being employed. So for instance, when one character is kneeling down and another character is standing, the eye line tends to be like this rather than like this. And so there seems to be an interesting play in terms of camera work and eye lines. And the camera is always low, or most of the time it's low. And a lot of people seem to suggest that perhaps it has to do with the tatami room and the way people sit. But even this low camera angle is used in, for instance, the scenes where in the school, in the classroom. So classrooms are not tatami style rooms. So I would suggest that perhaps the camera, the low angle camera, is perhaps just something that is visually pleasing, perhaps, rather than anything necessarily indicative of like a tatami style or anything like that. But that's like the conversation for another day, perhaps. But also notice the way in which editing is employed and the way in which thematic links or visual links are employed. So what do I mean? So let's talk about editing. There are basically no fades. It's just sharp edits from one scene to another. And so we have sometimes the passage of an amount of time between one scene and another scene, and that's connected by an edit. I think the most visually striking example is at the end, where the boys have run away, and we get a shot of the apartment, the English tutor's apartment, and then we see the clock on the wall. And it says, I think, 8:10 in the evening. And then we immediately cut to the clock on the Hayashi's house wall, and it's like 8:45. So immediately, passage of what is it, 35, 40 minutes perhaps, has occurred just within one cut. And then within that time, of course, we can assume that it's by that time the English shooter has gone out and has found the boys watching TV near the train station and has brought them home. That's an example, I think, of really dynamic editing, the amount of time that passes and what happens just between cuts. It's very interesting. And just notice how that is employed later or in other areas in Ozu's film. Sometimes there's no passage of time at all. Sometimes there's a great deal of time that passes. It's really great. Also notice, try to keep track of when it's a weekday and when it's a weekend. It's usually probably weekend. You can tell because the husbands are at home; they're not at work, and also the boys are not necessarily going to school. But it's not quite clear to me. And visual thematic connections. Excuse me. There are some ways in which visual connections are being made. What are some examples? Excuse me. Some examples are. At the beginning of the film, Mr. Hayashi, the Chishiryu character, he is seen walking into the bar. He's looking for a glove that he might have left behind. And he's wearing a black hat with a black coat, and he's got I think a kind of a light brown suitcase, if I recall correctly. And then there's a scene involving him and Mr. Tomizawa, and they're talking about Mr. Tomizawa's forced retirement. And then he kind of nods off, and then Mr. Hayashi slowly pulls out a cigarette and just taps it, and then that's it. That is, I think, thematically linked later in the film, where the Hayashis are just on their home together, and Mr. Tomizawa has visited them, and he's left. And then the two of them are there alone in the house, and then suddenly Mrs. Hayashi very suddenly says, perhaps we should begin thinking about retirement as well. And then Mr. Hayashi just silently just sits there. And so therefore, that's a very interesting visual link, right? Because at the beginning, when we see him in the bar and he's sort of tapping his cigarette, we're not necessarily sure what he's thinking. But later, when we see this information about how perhaps he is approaching the same age of forced retirement, perhaps it was that moment at the bar that he was thinking the same thing, namely, I'm very close to my own retirement, so I have to start thinking. And it's a very significant moment in one's life, right? Having to retire from one's job. And so that's a really amazing way in which two separate points in the film are joined together. So startling. And it's never explored ever again in the film. The idea of forced retirement is explored only in these two primary moments. There's another moment that's a visual connection with Mr. Hayashi and his hat, black coat. The next day, we see the boys walking to school, and we see walking towards them a man with a black hat and a black coat walking towards them. And so we assume it's perhaps Mr. Hayashi, but he's carrying a different colored suitcase. I think it's a darker brown this time. And he's walking, and all the boys are sort of formally taking off their hats and saying, "Ohayou gozaimasu." And then the man turns, and we see that it's not Mr. Hayashi at all. It's a strange man. Who is this man? But obviously they know each other. Later we find out that the man is in fact the school teacher of the elder boy, Mr. Minoru. So all this information, I mean, he's wearing the same black coat or the similar kind of black coat and black hat. So that's a kind of visual connection that's made between two scenes that are close in proximity. Another example of a kind of a visual or thematic link is in that same scene in the bar between Mr. Tomizawa and Mr. Hayashi. Remember, Mr. Tomizawa invites him for one drink. He sits down, and notice Mr. Tomizawa gives Mr. Hayashi his same sake cup, and he shares the same sake cup and gives it back to Mr. Tomizawa. So they share the same cup. And I love how it's similar to the scene at the end where the boys have run off and they're sitting on the river side eating rice and drinking tea. And they don't share the same cup, but Minoru is drinking out of the lid, and then Isamu is drinking out of his hand, right? So they're not sharing it, but it's sort of this, it's same kind of, it's a similar kind of thing where there are two people drinking. There's a different way in which drinking is being done, you know, out of the hand versus sharing the cup or out of the lid. But I think the same thing is going on. You know, the way in which people are drinking is, think, so indicative of a lot of things. So notice how drinking is being showed in this film. Very interesting. Also, incidentally, speaking of that scene in the riverbed, or by the riverside and the two boys, there's also a great visual link in the scene immediately prior to that. If I recall correctly, the scene immediately prior to that is Mr. and Mrs. Hayashi in their house after Mr. Tomizawa has gone, and Mrs. Hayashi is saying, you know, maybe it's about time we should be talking about retirement. And then Mr. Hayashi is sitting down, and then Mrs. Hayashi is sitting down, and then she stands up and then leaves, and then just leaves him. And then it cuts to Minoru and Isamu on the riverside, and Minoru is sitting down, and Isamu is actually standing up, and he's just relieving himself, right? He's just going to the bathroom, relieving himself, and then he finishes, and he goes back and he sits down. So I love that, because the scene immediately prior was Mr. and Mrs. Hayashi sitting down. She gets up and leaves, and then the scene immediately after that is Minoru sitting down, and then Isamu standing up, and he finishes, and he comes back and he sits down. So it's like the children are completing the actions of the parents that were in the immediate prior scene. I love that. So that's just an example of how I think Ozu is trying to visually connect two separate or disparate scenes in a way that it creates a kind of sort of a subconscious flow of movement, perhaps. But anyway, sorry about that. So when you watch the film again, please see if you can catch some of those moments. I think it's really interesting. Okay, I'm going to have to end it there because it's almost 2 hours here. So I'm sorry if I haven't spoken to all of your comments here, because it's been really great. But just as, oh my goodness, and I see Melinda you've left what is it, super chat? Someone has left, and Litcrit super chat? Gosh, you really didn't have to do that, my friends. Thank you so much. Wow, that's really kind of you. Thank you so much. That, oh my goodness, thank you. That's very kind of you. Oh gosh, I don't know what to say. Again, I'm really sorry about, I'm skipping over this chat because it's really, oh man, it's almost 2 hours here, so I'm gonna have to wind it down because I need to take my dog for a walk. But just as a close, again, I really want to thank you all for joining this Master 25. Hello, I'm glad I caught you. Sal, Ashwin, hello, and it's nice to see you. And Carl Reese, hello, it's nice to see you. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to catch as many people as I can. If I've missed you, I really apologize. I didn't mean to. I feel really bad if I've done so, but anyway, I really have to go soon. So let me just end my conversation there. But just because I'm ending my conversation doesn't mean that yours has to end. So anyone out there who has your own YouTube channel, if you have any thoughts or comments about Good Morning, if you have a moment, even if it's just for a couple minutes or a minute or so, I'd love to see your video about Good Morning and what you thought about the film. And you please share it with us. You can leave a link in this video after it's uploaded, or you can do whatever you want. I'd love to share it with everyone, and just to hear your thoughts and to hear you speak about the film. For anyone else, you can leave your thoughts and comments about the film in the comment section here below, or maybe in another video. I'd love to hear what you have to say, because this is really great. And as I said, for anyone who is new to this channel, who isn't a subscriber or who hasn't commented yet, please, I would love for it if you would subscribe and you would leave a comment. That would be really great. But again, no pressure, but it would be really nice to see you and to talk with you. And hopefully you can make some recommendations for me as to films that I should watch. So again, just for your consideration, for anyone who's new out there, I'd really love to meet with you and to talk with you. And again, it's really nice to make new friends. So for your consideration. So, and last but not least, thank you very much for this. This, I think, was really successful. It was really great. And so let's do this again. Maybe let's try every 2 weeks, if that's, I'll try to figure it out some more, but let's try every 2 weeks, and I will get the new, let's talk about a new film 2 weeks from now. So the same time, same place. So Sunday, whatever that date is, I'll make an announcement later. The question now is, my friends, what film should we talk about next? What film should we talk about next? I've thought about this a lot and I still haven't made up my mind. If you have any suggestions as to what films we should talk about next, please let me know in the comments section. Let's try to keep it to something that's Criterion Collection related. Usually Criterion Collection has films that are available on other labels as well. So I'd like to have a film that is readily available. To my Laserdisc friends out there, I'd also like to have a film that preferably has been made available on Laserdisc as well. So if you have any suggestions, please let me know. I did think about trying to do other Ozu films, but I'm not sure about that yet. We shall see. But I do like to. I'm not sure about a theme, but I know people have been asking. Maybe I should try to create a long list and plan it out. But I'll do as much as I can. But I think a lot of the fun is also hearing what you have to say. So if you have any thoughts or comments about it. Matthew, I just noticed Matthew McNichol says Salo. Oh boy, Salo. I don't. Well, that is a Criterion Collection Laserdisc, but oh gosh, I'm not sure. Yeah, maybe. I'll think about it. SJS Films, I've noticed, says Symbiocycotoxoplasm. That might be a good suggestion. Blow Up, says Carl Reese. That's really good as well. Oh gosh, Solitaire Ronin Film says Ikiru. Wonderful. That's all. Oh man. Okay. So many. Just keep the recommendations coming. So if I don't choose your recommendation, I apologize in advance. But I will certainly, please rest assured, I will certainly take it into consideration. I will think about it very hard, and I will be sure to give it my all when I consider it. So, and Salo, I should be very clear. I adore Salo very much. I think it is a very important film, but I understand it is a very tough film. It is an incredibly tough film, and so I'm not sure if it's the best film to have as the second film club watch, because it also is one that I think it has the potential for inviting, how should I put it, certain types of comments that I think are very interesting. But I would like to talk about Solo one of these days, perhaps when this film club is a little bit more, maybe it's more assured, perhaps. But I am a great admirer of Solo. I think it's such an important film, but it is not a film for everyone. It is a film that is very unpleasant, and so I would like to try and have a film that has it can appeal to many people, and it's a film that might not necessarily be one that turns off a certain group of people, if you know what I mean, because it is a very tough and quite an intense film. But one of these days, perhaps, so we can talk about Solo. That Picnic at Hanging Rock. I was thinking about that actually, but Tampopo, Yojimbo, La Belle et la Bête, any Akira Kurosawa film, Harakiri, Walkabout, yes, SJS Films. SJS Films just made a video about his, or not video, but he left a comment about how he just saw Walkabout. The Three Colors. Yes, that's very interesting because, I'm a part of the 25th Frame Media Group, and one of the podcasts in that network is this great podcast called The Complete, and The Complete is currently doing a season on Kieślowski, so that might tie in very well with their work on Kieślowski. Incidentally, 25th Frame Media podcasts, very awesome, very awesome. Please check out 25thframemedia.com for more information about great podcasts, and included in which is I'm very privileged and honored to be part of the 25th Frame media. Hanging Rock, a lot of Hanging Rock. So anyway, cheers to you all, and thank you so much. This really means a lot, and I take it as a great success because of you, and your conversation has been absolutely fantastic. Absolutely, absolutely fantastic. So thank you so much. And I guess I feel so happy. So what should I do? Maybe I should go like that, right? Thank you so much. It really has made my day. And keep those suggestions coming, and look out for more videos. I will try to finish my Edward Yang project. I know it's been a long time coming, so I apologize for that. Confusion is on the way. I also finished the Kazuo Hara films, and also Dead Ringers is on the way too. And also, I haven't decided yet, but David Lynch in the Criterion Collection might be something that is very interesting, but I haven't quite decided yet. And also, to my dear friend Jared, who is a big fan of the Dark Knight trilogy and Star Wars, I do want to talk about those films one of these days, because I really like those films very much, and Jared is such a great guy, and so I would like to dedicate some videos to him. And I think what better way to do that would Dark Knight and Star Wars. But just some things I'm thinking about. I don't quite have a clear set of videos yet, but I'll do the best as I can. In the meantime, my friends, thank you so much again for joining me with this discussion of Ohio. And again, the conversation does not end here. It only begins. So please keep talking in your own YouTube channels, in your own conversation spaces with your friends and family, and watch more Ozu films. If you have any videos and comments you want to make to me, leave the links below, or send me the links, or leave comments, and I will love to just watch them and read them. It's a great film, and I hope you enjoyed watching it. And it was certainly a pleasure, my pleasure, to be able to talk with you and to hear your thoughts about this really great film, Yasujiro Ozu's Good Morning. Okay, my friends, that's it from me. So thank you very much for joining. And until we meet again, what do I usually say? Please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great movies. I really mean that. Please be happy and safe. It's a tough world out there sometimes, and sometimes there are a lot of unpleasant things happen in the world. Some things that bring us down, some things that are not so happy. I hope that you are well. Please take good care of yourselves. Please take good care of your family and friends. And until we meet again, my friends, cheers.